Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Maria Patiguana, Principal Private Sector Development Specialist with ADB Southeast Asia Department. It's fantastic to have so many of you joining us today for this discussion on scaling what works, private sector development as a catalyst for growth in Southeast Asia. This webinar is organized by the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, ACGF, an initiative of the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund. So in terms of format and structure, today's session is intentionally practical. We will hear real-world examples, projects that push boundaries, solve market failures, and showed what's possible when policy support, innovative financing, and strong partnerships come together. We will kick things off with Pratish Aladi, ADB's Regional Head for Private Sector Development, who will set the stage on why private sector development is a true game changer for Southeast Asia. Then we will dive into two short case studies from frontier SME finance in the Mekong region to women's entrepreneurship in Vietnam. And we will also explore how blended finance can de-risk markets and unlock capital. After that, we will bring our panel together for moderated dialogue with voices ranging from government, private sector, development partners working on the ground. And of course, we will wrap up with your questions and key takeaways. But before we do so, let me introduce our amazing panel. So with us, we have Ms. Hung. She's the Deputy Director General for Vietnam's Agency for Private Enterprise and Cooperative Development at the Ministry of Finance. Ms. Hung has over 20 years of experience shaping MSME and private sector policy and advancing women-led and sustainable enterprises. Patricia Srojojo. Patricia focuses on scaling innovative, impact-driven ventures across Southeast Asia, and she's a strong champion for female founders and inclusive funding ecosystems. We also have Sunita Dubey, who brings 25 years of experience in energy transition and climate action, advising governments, investors, and partners on clean energy strategies and gender-responsive climate solutions. From within ADB, we have Dominic Mella. Dominic has a solid track record of turning ideas into real investable ventures. He helped launch ADB Frontier, ADB Ventures, and the Mekong Business Initiative, and has led strategic planning and venture building across Southeast Asia, the Pacific, the Middle East, and Africa. Adnan Rafiq, he leads transactions across South, Central, and Southeast Asia in ADB's Private Sector Financial Institutions Division. He played a key role in deploying the Wi-Fi grant in Vietnam to expand lending and services for women-led SMEs, and we will hear a little bit more soon. And finally, we have Jay Young Wee. He is with ADB's blended finance team and brings experience across sustainable finance, financial institutions, and global climate funds, including the JCFs. Thank you again for joining us. I'm genuinely excited about the insights we'll uncover today. And with that, Pratish, over to you.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar. We're really excited to be here today. And we have, as Maria mentioned, a very esteemed lineup of panelists and speakers on the subject. So I just want to set the scene a bit by setting out how we look at private sector development as a catalyst for growth at ADB. We believe that mobilizing private capital and maximizing private sector participation comes from a well-coordinated confluence of activities in three areas, all of which you'll hear about more today. First, engagement at policy and upstream levels to set the right enabling environment for private sector development. Second, preparation of projects so that they're commercially viable and bankable for the private sector. We find often that the issue in channeling private capital towards projects is not so much a dearth of capital, but a dearth of bankable projects. Third, the de-risking of projects and creating the right products to meet market needs. The unique problems we face in our developing member countries require unique solutions. And you'll hear about some of those today and how we can better scale these up for impact. How can we also use tools such as blended finance to strategically push marginally bankable projects into viability so that we can multiply the capital effect? And ADB's done this to quite a large degree already. With that framework in mind, I want to give some context. The world is changing. The Southeast Asian region is evolving in its needs, increasing in sophistication, particularly on larger problems of our time, such as addressing climate change or building the ASEAN power grid. This requires new solutions, new products, new actors, and new ways to coordinate within the ecosystem. Some traditional sources of donor capital are becoming increasingly scarce. At the same time, we're seeing new actors, such as philanthropies and family offices, step up to find new ways to create impact. How can we bring them in? How can we ensure we have the right tools to meet these needs for our evolving region? And lastly, how can we do it in a way that ensures that women, small businesses, and frontier economies are not left behind? ADB as a bank has stepped up to this challenge. We have reorganized our institution to focus first on developing solutions and then combining and sequencing our products to deliver on that. Our approach is underpinned by developing private sector development strategies in each of our countries that, by bringing the bank together in bespoke ways that are relevant to that country, maximize private sector development impact and mobilization in key sectors, again, by bringing together our upstream policy work, midstream project preparation, and downstream financing and de-risking. We have applied this approach in areas of SME development, green finance, infrastructure and PPPs, and many more. So in the Southeast Asian region in 2024 alone, we have mobilized over $2.5 billion of private capital towards projects and similarly leveraged our own non-sovereign financing to co-finance and mobilize more capital. We're developing large-scale policy reform operations that create a favorable environment for businesses and foreign investment in places like Philippines, Cambodia, Indonesia, and others. And we've developed new instruments and facilities, some of which you'll hear about today, to reach the underserved segments of our countries. With that, I again thank you for joining us. I encourage you to ask questions to our esteemed panel later on, and I hope you will take away many insights from our event and stay in touch because we're all in this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pratish. I think it's clear that while the ambition is huge from a private sector development viewpoint, the key question is how we translate it into action. And to make this more tangible, we'll now look at two short case studies I mentioned before. We will start with Dominic with the Frontier SME Finance. And after Dominic, we'll have Adnan walking us through the women's entrepreneurship in Vietnam to showcase how innovative approaches can de-risk markets. Blended finance will come after that with Jae Young Wee to talk about blended finance approaches and instruments to unlock capital. So over to you, Dom.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. This will be a short 7-8 minute presentation, about 6 slides that I'll run over quickly. So the ADB Frontier Mekong Fund is actually the 5th fund as part of an early stage innovation financing platform that ADB set up back in 2020. And the mission and purpose of the platform is to crowd in more catalytic capital into nascent asset classes and underdeveloped markets that currently mainstream financing is not yet reaching. So the way we do that, of course, is that we have to, there's a combination of things. And the first thing we typically do would be to map out the target market, understand the ecosystem, understand the existing players that are already financing, understand the profile and pipeline of companies and the reason they aren't able to access financing. And our preference is always to work through partnerships and to work indirectly. But in some cases where a market may be more underdeveloped, we may take a more direct approach. But a cross-cutting theme, regardless, is that you need to leverage local knowledge. So we adopt a decentralized, for example, investment committee that Patricia is also part of, that brings external expertise on early stage investing where maybe ADB internally is still evolving and still learning. And another element is to pilot and to test new products that may be more suited to the profile of the businesses we're trying to support in these markets. And that itself requires interaction with regulators, local legal firms to understand what may be possible and what may not be possible in any particular market. So as I mentioned, the Frontier Mekong Fund is our it's our fourth fund, because after this, the fifth fund was a Pacific fund. It was only possible through also, I just want to quickly acknowledge the generosity of partners, the government of Australia, the government of the Republic of Korea, and also the government of Switzerland also contributed to this fund alongside ADB, and we launched it in October 2024 last year. So still quite a young operation, and we're still learning as we speak. It's a small fund, 10 million within ADB context. That's a very small fund. But as you'll see later from the types of companies we fund, not necessarily less impactful. We make investments up to 400,000. So far, we have a portfolio of 10 companies, and we're targeting to invest up to 30 companies, applying a gender equality lens, a climate lens, and focused on Cambodia and Laos, which are the two markets within ASEAN, with the exception of Myanmar, where we currently don't yet have full operations, is still nascent and needs the support, and of course also Timor. So why do we focus on early stage innovative companies? They are a small segment and a small part of the broader SME ecosystem, but literature shows that these are the companies that typically will become the industry leaders of tomorrow and generate new industries in these markets. And they generate most of the jobs as well. And typically they have very unique financing needs. These are companies that could be growing strong. They could have significant offtake contracts in the off-taker contracts in their pipeline, but they may be asset light. They don't yet have a long history of business track record. In these markets we operate in, they may also be building the infrastructure, the accounting, financial systems, and there's a myriad of reasons why they cannot yet access mainstream debt financing, for example. And then even in terms of equity and risk profile, because of the small size of these markets, the unit economics of operating private equity VC funds that focus on these markets is also quite challenging, particularly for early stage tickets. So the types of deals that we want to make when we talk about early stage innovative, it doesn't necessarily need to be the latest cutting edge technology, but we do place a focus on businesses that are transforming existing local industries, import substituting, and building local industry. So these are some examples of companies we've supported so far. The first commercial dairy farm in Cambodia, the first B2B e-commerce health care pharmaceutical platform in Cambodia, the first agroforestry coffee plantation in Laos, and so forth. So the key word here is the first. Many of the companies we focus on, they may not ultimately be successful, but because they're first mover and transforming industries, the impact is not only at a transaction level, but at a market-wide level potentially. So we have the flexibility with the instrument we use to tailor different products, and every market is unique. One example of a product that we've been tailoring is called revenue-based financing. So many of the companies that are operating in these markets at a very early stage, they rely on grants and family friends funding, but they reach a critical inflection point in their journey when they need to access larger amounts of institutional capital. But the local banks tend to be still quite narrow in their offering and focus on corporate financing or businesses with track record and businesses that have high levels of collateral. And as I mentioned earlier, the equity market is relatively nascent, and also the sophistication of businesses to agree on their valuation with equity companies is also challenging. So because of that, the revenue-based financing type products offer certain advantages. First of all, it's cash flow friendly. For businesses that are impacted by the natural seasonality. For example, tourism is an important sector in these markets, agriculture and working capital needs, revenues go up and down. And so the way revenue-based financing works is that you take a share of a company's future revenues. And so when there are down cycles, the repayment schedule will adjust accordingly. That means also that we can focus on businesses that are more collateral light. And it also allows for businesses to retain ownership and to not get bogged down on the complexity of evaluating equity and valuation. The other aspect is that it then bonds us as an investor and the company in terms of we are aligned that the company needs to grow, because the faster they grow, the faster we collect our revenues back. And therefore, there's a natural, we become partners rather than just purely a debt financier, which means we have added motivation to support the company in their journey, and hopefully they can grow and we get our money back. So these are just some examples of companies we've supported so far. Sometimes we also look to leverage ADB's existing sovereign operations. So the first example of Save the Lives is a company that provides waste management services to local government, recycling and producing high-value products, including fertilizer for farms nationwide. And ADB actually on our sovereign operations side is one of the biggest urban infrastructure investors. And a big challenge we face is identifying SMEs like this that can actually maintain the infrastructure that we build. So on the one hand, we want to develop the capital market, we want to support impact, but also sometimes there can be strategic value to supporting companies that can also provide broader support to our infrastructure operations. The second example is a company called Loker in Laos that was it's a ride sharing company, but they also provide financing support to companies to drivers to switch their cars from diesel, petrol to EV, and they're building out the EV charging station in Laos. I think this example also illustrates that sometimes for these small markets, while they have disadvantages, the small market size also means less competition. So, Grab, Uber, they've not yet accessed this market, and this company is able to build out their local operations. And then another part of ADB now is actually helping this company to issue a green bond in a local partial Lao-Keep denominated bond. So those are just some examples. Then just to wrap up the presentation, what are the learnings? I think the challenge for us in these markets is that there is a grant culture. A lot of the support that donors provide, government provides, is to provide very highly concessional funding, often through grants. And so when we engage and interact with businesses, when they hear we're ADB, they think we're giving them a grant. And then when we explain that actually we're priced to market, where actually this will cost them more than what it would cost even for them to access bank asset-based lending, although that's not often an option, they start to have to think hard. Do we really need this money? How much do we need? What do we use it for? And that's exactly the type of interaction that we want to develop that mindset to pave the way for other institutional investors to come in. There's a lot of effort we have to put into capacity training, in terms of awareness around different types of products, equity, quasi-equity, revenue-based financing. Terms that we take for granted ourselves are not easily understood and widely understood in these markets. And we're experimenting with a phased tranching operation where our initial first tranche, a smaller tranche, can help companies upgrade their financial accounting systems, because their ability for us to monitor, for us to do DD, critically needs that information as well. And finally, I think just to, going back to the first point, ultimately, ADB can't scale these things alone, and we shouldn't. We do this through the learning value. We're engaging with regulators, we're trying new products, but ultimately to scale it, we need to do that through partnerships. So already we're beginning some initial discussions with funds that are active in these markets, some non-bank financial institutions with a mindset to also innovate, where we can maybe look at explore ways that we could work with those types of partners to scale these types of operations for impact. So thank you. I'll end my presentation there and hand back over to Maria. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. Adnan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Maria and Pratish, for the opening remarks. I have a few slides that I would like to share. So I would start with what is WeFi? So Women Entrepreneur Finance Initiative. It's a global partnership program initiated by 14 governments. So to increase the access to finance for women entrepreneurs, improve the skills, and also to make the environment, the ecosystem work where lending to women can be increased. So the first slide I've mentioned WeFi, there are four key pillars. One is access to finance, which includes loans, guarantees, equity, and it can be first loss or kind of arrangement. The second one is access to market, which essentially looks at how networking can improve women to actually increase and scale up their businesses. And of course, the third one is access to skills, which includes both financial and digital literacy. And the fourth one is enabling environments, where we look at institutions, policymakers, banks, how they can help increase financing to women. On a global level, the financing gap for women entrepreneurs is around $1.7 trillion. And in Vietnam, it stands around $6 billion, as per one of the reports published in 2022. So if I look at the box on the left, these are the five main, six main challenges or barriers to lending to women. So when we entered Vietnam 6-7 years back and started lending to women entrepreneurs, we realized that the financial institutions were not very keen to lend in that space. So what we did was, as ADB, we hired consultants to kind of assess why the main challenges or barriers to women are. And this box basically summarizes the key challenges, which include culture and social barriers, limited network and mentorship opportunities, high risk perceived by the financial institutions, lack of tailored products, limited financial literacy, and collateral and credit constraints. So what we did was we said, fine, these are the challenges, and then we were lucky to have access to the WeFi money. So we structured our transactions, and we made sure that our development targets include or address these challenges. And on the right, if you look at the right side, we have encouraged the institutions to have management information systems, which can generate reports where they can have the sex disaggregated data. So it's easier that where what number of women SMEs they are lending to and what they are not. We were actually surprised to realize that none of the banks had, they were collecting all the data manually. So that was a big challenge. And some of the, one of the grand milestones, grant given by the WeFi, was to have these systems up and running. The second one was the lack of gender responsive financial products, which we also encourage the banks to, as part of our development effectiveness or monitoring table, we included one of the targets for the banks to have introduced that product. And the third one was advisory services for women that could include financial, that can include digital trainings. And then there were, we looked at different products. What can we help the women entrepreneurs? So all in all, what we tried to do was look at the challenges that were faced by the women in the Vietnam context, and we actually structured our transactions with a senior loan. We had the V5 grant attached to those senior loans where we can address those challenges. Looking forward to other panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adnan. So we looked at two case studies with different approaches, different from the plain vanilla loan on equity to support clients, where in some cases risk profile was higher than standard. We will now look at a different lens, which is blended finance to achieve the same mobilized private sector capital using concessional funds and donor money to de-risk some of the commercial structures. Over to you, Jae-young. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jae-young, and I'm currently working in blended finance team under private sector operation department at the ADB. And today I'm going to share with you how ADB uses blended finance as a critical tool to really increase private capital and deliver strong development impact in Southeast Asia region. So as you can see, the blended finance has various definitions, but according to DFI working group, blended finance is the use of funding from donor or third party to address the sustainable development goals and mobilize private resources. And when you look at next slide, at ADB, blended finance is used alongside ADB's ordinary capital resources, which is called OCR, and these are the ADB financing on commercial terms. And blended finance can be in various forms, such as debt, equity, risk sharing, or guarantee product with different rates, tenor, security, or rank. And it can be also formed as a even performance-based incentive. So it is quite flexible and it can be tailored based on specific market barriers and also depending on the requirement of the donors. Next slide, please. So just to give you a quick sense of the blended finance market, the blended concessional finance market has been growing over the last few years, and it's estimated to be around 9 to 15 billion annually. And MDB contribute roughly about 1.8 billion each year. So this shows that blended finance is now a widely used and important tool. And at ADB, we've been actively using it as well. And we have also dedicated team focusing on implementing and managing blended finance team, finance, which I'm part of. So now I want to share the real world examples where ADB has used blended finance to deliver high development impact. So if you look at the next slide, this is the case study I wanted to share called Mura Labo Geothermal Project in Indonesia. So in this project, we provided a financing package of 93 million, which included 39 million from ADB OCR and 39 million from private mobilization. And we also provide 15 million blended finance from Australian Climate Finance Partnership Fund. So the project is an expansion of the existing 80 megawatt geothermal facility that has been ongoing since 2019. And the aim of this project is really to double its size by adding additional productions and injection wells, and also constructing and operating a new power generation unit. And as you, some of you know, Indonesia has one of the largest geothermal resources in the world. But when it comes to utilization, it's still very much limited, mainly because geothermal power projects naturally carry higher risk compared to most conventional power sources, because it usually involves risks related to drilling and also well and resource maintenance, and also construction risk affect overall long-term performance. So because of such high risk profile of the project and high upfront capital costs required, commercial lenders were quite hesitant to support this type of project. So what we did is that we used concessional finance from ACFP in form of subordinated loan so that it can strengthen the debt service coverage ratio of the project and also provided a cash buffer for senior lender. And when you look at concessional tranche, it's quite small, which is about 3% of the total project cost. But it was really important when it comes to mobilizing private commercial capital. So because of this concessional tranche, we were able to bring private mobilization from SMBC to bring 39 million and also other parallel lenders to support this project. And the project overall achieved a leverage ratio of more than 30 times. And it also became the first major internationally financed private sector geothermal project in Indonesia over the last 8 years, and also became one of the first commercial financing on clean risk basis in this sector. And it brings significant climate benefit as well. So the project is estimated to bring about 400,000 tons of CO2 emission reduction on annual basis. And this case clearly demonstrates how a small amount of concessional capital can really help unlock significant private investment in those high risk but high impact clean energy projects. And it can help provide reliable baseload energy and support broader economic development in Indonesia. So in the next slide, I now want to share a case from the financial sector where ADB uses intermediary finance to pass down its impact to a wider economy. So this case study is with the House Bank in Mongolia to scale up its lending portfolio for climate mitigation and adaptation project. And in this project, ADB provided 35 million financing package, which included 25 million ADB loan, which is blended together with 10 million concessional loan from Canadian Fund for Climate Nature in the private sector. In context of the country, Mongolia faced quite significant climate challenge, but when it comes to climate finance market, it still remains quite small, which represent only about 3% of the total banking asset. But the climate investment usually require higher upfront cost and also longer payback period. But in the Mongolian market, the interest rate and provisioning requirement remain quite high, which result in lack of stable and affordable long-term funding, which is sort of the main obstacle for Mongolian firms and households to invest in such high-performing technology. So what we did is to address this barrier. We use concessional loan so that it can help reduce house banks' overall funding cost so that the bank can offer more affordable financing in those sectors with strong climate impact. And the project covered quite broad range of activity, which included energy efficiency and renewable energy, but also green building sectors and also transport and agriculture and others related to resilience as well. So on top of this financing package, ADB also provided technical assistance to strengthen the bank's capabilities and also supported upstream work with the government to address broader market barrier so that it can help create enabling environment. So in this project, concessional tranche was very crucial to enable house bank to test new markets with high mitigation and adaptation potential. It also enabled house bank to reach underserved segments such as women-led MSMEs or MSMEs which carry higher underlying risk. So through this project, house bank can gradually build the data and experience so that they can sustain green lending without concessional support over time. So this type of blended finance project in financial sector for supporting sustainable finance is something we are trying to replicate and scale up in Vietnam and also other Southeast Asian market. And we expect to see more precedent cases going forward. So as these two examples show, blended finance structure has been very powerful instrument to de-risk projects and crowd in private capital, where commercial financing remains constrained by those high risk. And in Southeast Asia region, we are actually seeing strong momentum. And we expect to pave way for new pioneering project using blended finance, and we expect to deliver strong development impact in the region. So this is the end of my presentation, and I will hand over to Maria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dominic, Adnan, Jay, Young. The case studies we just heard show us all what's possible on the ground, but of course, every success requires collaboration across sectors and collaboration with partners. And that's why our next section brings together our distinguished panel representing government, private sector, and development partners for moderated dialogue. I will hand over the floor to you, Pratish, for the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And thank you again to the speakers so far and our panelists who are turning on their videos now. I will, ask a few questions, but I also do recognize there are some questions in the Q&A. So if you have more questions for our panelists as we go, please don't hesitate to ask. But maybe I'll start with a few questions to get us going. And maybe I'll start by asking you, Patricia, a question. We've, over the last few minutes, we've seen many good examples of innovative pilots, whether it's large-scale infrastructure projects, lending to women SMEs, or the Frontier Seed, which is really touching companies across different sectors in our region. But the real question is about achieving scale and how to crowd in more market players to these types of activities. In your view, and given your experience, how can we scale up these innovative pilots once we've demonstrated that the idea works in at least one or two contexts?
Thanks, Pratish, for the question. I think it's a very, very relevant one. And Dominic also touched in his presentation that, something like, ADB Frontier Seed, it's a great way to prove the concept. But, in order to make it more scalable, we need to bring it outside. In my view, I think one of the best ways to scale up initiatives like this is really to empower local capital providers, the LCPs in each market. I think the first reason is, they know the markets best, right? They're much closer to the companies. They know the local environment. And Southeast Asia is also very unique in the sense that every market is, quite different from each other. I think secondly, too, from the question of scale, like if, let's say, something like a Frontier Seed can invest in 20 companies, if you invest in LCPs, local capital providers, you can easily support, more than, hundreds of companies. And I think the third reason, too, is that I think development of financial institutions like ADB, government, and philanthropy have a very, very important role, and possibly a very unique role in acting as a catalytic agent for crowding in financing. I think one of the main difficulties of LCPs, especially if you're an emerging fund manager, is really to raise your fund, right? I think it's hard enough as a fund manager to raise your fund. I think it's even more difficult if you're doing it for a new product. And I'm talking about products that are outside of the typical, private equity, VC types of products, which in my view is what is needed in the market, right? I think we are seeing a lot of companies that are addressing very important issues like, environmental, social, which do not fit within this VC model. So I think there is really a great opportunity for collaboration between, DFIs, public sector, philanthropy, to really become a catalytic funding provider in either becoming the anchor first investor, into some of the emerging funds, and two, to take on an ecosystem building role, right? In the sense that refining the goals and the returns expectation to adjust to the risk and the impact. I think within the impact investing sector, we've always kind of been targeting the same returns as what you would see in a PE or in a VC fund, 30%. But I think we also need to look at the goal, right? Creating a robust financial ecosystem takes time, and maybe that is not exactly the right kind of return that we need to target right off the bat.
No, thank you very much, Patricia. No, and certainly maybe if we have time later, I'll come back with a couple more detail on that. But I wanted to maybe also shift gears a bit and talk a bit about the enabling environment and the ecosystem. And I know we haven't talked a whole lot about that during the event so far, but here maybe I want to ask Ms. Huang a question because you're very much involved on the public sector side on how to drive this kind of innovation within a country in Vietnam. But we also recognize that innovation thrives and needs the right enabling environment. And Vietnam has actually set a very strong example for how government can set the right policies, with Resolution 68 acknowledging the role of private sector development in the country's economic growth, but also in other ways that have led to a startup ecosystem, fintech ecosystem, and others. In your view, what is the role of government in enabling this type of private sector innovation, and how can governments help to scale that up? And lastly, how can ADB, as a multilateral development bank with a policy lending program, support government in this?
Thank you very much, Pratish. It's a pleasure for me to join this very fruitful discussion today. And I'm very glad to be part of the conversation focused on how we can strengthen the private sector innovation to support Vietnam economic growth. As you may know that recent years, Vietnam's private sector has truly become a driving force of the economy. And today it contributes more than half of our GDP and creates jobs for over 82% of the total workforce. Also contributes more than 30% of the state budget revenues. These figures show that the private sector are not just an engine of the growth, but they are essential pillar for Vietnam's long-term prosperity. But the value of the private sector goes beyond the numbers. Private sector, from the dynamic startups to the large national champions, are where entrepreneurs, new ideas, and bold innovation flourish. They are essential for Vietnam to move forward a green, digital, and knowledge-based economy. So, what is the role of the government in enabling innovation? From my point of view, to help innovation truly take off, government has a very important role to play in 4 aspects. First, I think we need to improve a predictable and supportive policy environment. Policies such as the Resolution 68, as mentioned, right? So that the Vietnam recognizes the private sector as the most important driver of the growth and innovation. Clear and consistent policies give entrepreneurs and investors the confidence to take risks and invest in the new solutions. And second, the governments must ensure the equal business rights, protect legitimate asset ownership, and reduce the administrative barriers. When we simplify the procedures and increase the transparency and reduce the ask-give mechanisms, we unlock enormous creative potential for the private sector. And third, the government should invest in the enabling foundations of innovation, from the digital infrastructure to green energy, from high-quality human resources to strong research and development capabilities. And finally, I think the government can accelerate innovation by using regulatory sandboxes, national and public procurements to stimulate early market for the new technologies, where fintech, green tech, and digital transformation. And I think innovation is important, but scaling the innovations even more important. And I truly believe that this scaling must be inclusive and sustainable. So the government and the private sector must work together. So what does it mean? I think there are 2 points. Point one, it means we need to look at the both ends of the private sector. One hand, supporting the MSMEs, because many of them are still very small and struggling to grow. It needs to help them to access finance, capital, land, technology, and the market in a fairer and more transparent way. And on the other hand, we also need large firms to grow into the regional champions and lead in the high-tech areas and digital transformation and green industries. And point two, it also means embedding the sustainability into the growth of the private sector. Innovation must go hand in hand with the responsible business practices. So I think that this kind of private sector can help Vietnam move confidently towards the 2030 and the 2045 goals: competitive, innovative, green, and inclusive. And based on my experience working with ADB in the periods 2021 and 2022, my agency cooperated with ADB under the V5 process ASEAN presentation to improve the enabling environment for the women entrepreneurs through enhancing data-driven policy, knowledge sharing product like the women-led MSME White Book. And on this opportunity, I would like to thank you very much for the great operation. So I think that ADB can play a very powerful role in helping Vietnam to realize our vision. Through its policy-based lending, ADB can support the government in strengthening the legal frameworks, simplifying the administrative procedures, and building the enabling environment for the innovation. And ADB can also help mobilize the private sector, private capital through blended finance, guarantees, and risk-sharing mechanism, especially for green growth, climate tech, and digital transformation. And in addition, I think the ADB technical assistance also can help Vietnam to develop regulatory sandboxes, support innovation ecosystem, and enhance our human resources capability. And most importantly, I think ADB can connect Vietnam with the global knowledge and best practices and helping us move being an innovation adopter to innovation creator. And yes, that's some sharing my ideas, and thank you very much. And with the right policy, a strong partnership with the support from institutions like ADB, I think Vietnam, we can unleash the full potential of the Vietnamese private sector to contribute to the prosperous and green future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Huang. It's really encouraging to hear. And I must agree with you. Actually, our V5 program is what I think is one of our most successful, because we've seen it happen in multiple projects now already. And I really liked your point around human capital, and I think that's something maybe we don't talk about enough, which is skills development and how do we train our demographic dividend. That's an area that we hope to also support in our region quite a bit. Thank you for mentioning that. And thank you for the Vietnam government's leadership on these programs. Maybe I'll now turn to Sunita. And, I want to ask your perspective, being that you're from one of the leading philanthropies focused on the developing world, which is a GAP, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. We are actually seeing an increasing role for and interest from philanthropies in the capital stack of private sector projects. So my question here is, what can we do to bring their money in, and actually not just their money, but also their insights and their expertise in the most effective way, while also meeting their objectives? And what can institutions like ADB, which have blended finance and technical assistance programs, and I think Ms. Huang did a great job of articulating how we can utilize those, but what can we do to crowd in and scale up the use of philanthropic capital?
No, thank you, Pratish, for this question, and thank you, ADB and team, for the opportunity to be able to participate in this webinar. Yes, philanthropies are kind of a very interesting, I would say, a beast, which have they don't have too much of capital, but they have a capital which is very flexible, and they can definitely take more risk. And I think it's really important, like, how do you kind of use that capital? And I think before, like, I come to how ADB can use that capital, it is also interesting to kind of also learn what philanthropies are actually looking for, because, you know, the what ADB private sector is looking for maybe a little bit different from what philanthropies are looking for. So I think just aligning some of the impacts that you guys are looking for, and that alignment would be very, very useful. And in terms of the trend that we are seeing, you are seeing a lot of philanthropies moving to Singapore. So it used to be New York based or San Francisco based, but a lot of them are in Singapore. And what I'm seeing is, like, you know, there's a lot more interest in the region. There's a lot more interest to be closer to where the action is. And they were very much into the traditional kind of, like, really sectors like health and education, but now they're also moving into some of the energy transition and the green economy piece. So within this, they're also kind of trying to figure out this role. So I think this is very important time, and it's very, very timely that, you know, whether it's the ADB or the government kind of, like, really start understanding what their role can be. And I think there are certain kind of things, Pratish, you mentioned the capital stack. As I said, that, you know, the philanthropic capital is very, very flexible. So we have seen even within GAP, you know, it can come at any stage in the capital stack, at the very beginning or towards the end. Like, for example, like, you know, the first loss guarantee or the risk sharing facilities, early stage preparation. I think that is something that we have seen, or the offtake or revenue stabilization just towards the end of this thing. So but for them, I think what they want to see is what's the clear path that their catalytic capital can lead to is like a long-term impact. So they're not looking at, like, really just a project interest, but what they're looking at, like, really the programmatic interest, or, like, you know, some kind of a systemic shift that their money can bring in. So again, I would say that understanding and alignment, and also kind of, like, clearly kind of showing them where their capital can have maximum impact, and also bringing them early on. So I think the one thing that philanthropies kind of, like, really want is, like, they want to be part of the co-creation. They want to be able to see the process itself, rather than to bring something which is already cooked. So, and we are seeing that, you know, there are a lot of platforms that are coming together, blended finance platforms, where there's, like, they're designing the platforms together. So there are different ways to engage. And I think ADB has been doing an amazing work in bringing different stakeholders together as well.
Thank you very much for that. I see we have a question in the chat box. Maybe I'll start with that. It's a two-part question, and maybe I'll ask the first question to Patricia, and the second one maybe I'll just throw it out and see, because it has a private sector and a public sector component. But let me read it out. Thank you for this very informative discussion on financing schemes for environmentally and socially aligned infrastructure and startups, and the role for government enabling factors. My question focuses on integrity and corruption prevention. Given the significant sums involved in these projects and the goal of ensuring public benefit, question one, what specific built-in corruption prevention measures on transparency and accountability frameworks are recommended or required for these types of large-scale infrastructure or startup financing schemes that involve public-private collaboration? If it's okay, maybe can I ask Patricia to respond on that first, but other panelists, of course, please chime in afterwards.
Sure. Thanks, Pratish. So I can answer the question, I think, more from the perspective of a startup financing scheme, just because that's, you know, where my background is. So I mean, I've worked in fund management for almost, you know, 20 years, covering private equity and venture capital, mostly in Southeast Asia, but also globally. And, you know, I think this question around corruption and fraud prevention is a very important one that we don't talk about often enough. I think one of the key challenges of growth is making sure that things continue to run properly within the company. And I think whenever there's a large sum of money involved, I think it becomes very easy for people to get tempted to do things improperly, let's say. And from my experience, I think we need to put more emphasis on governance within the investments, with the portfolio companies, but also, within the funding organizations. And nobody really wants to do governance. I mean, as an investment professional, it's not the most fun. It's not the most exciting. Nobody really likes to hound their clients and say like, hey, make sure that, you give us the right reports, that the reports are done correctly. And often when times are good, these becomes too much of a check the boxes type of activities, right? But I've seen too many cases where these then leads to fraud, right? So I think we really need to insist on setting up the right governance system. And when you're working with, growth stage companies, a lot of them don't have this in place, right? And I think that is acceptable because that's where they are. I think part of the role of the investors is to help create this environment, to help transition the companies from, a single owner or like a single group ownership base into, a multi-stakeholder organization. And that is the process. So we can do this, through several mechanisms, right? First, definitely insisting on audits. Of course, you need to right-size it. Not every company needs to get, big four. And also maybe you don't need the whole entire, big audit process, but some sort of financial accountability and checks and balances is absolutely necessary. And I think one of the key advantages we have now is that we can embed a technology, right? So for example, we can learn from the fintech sectors where, some lenders are embedding, within the POS system ways to automatically account for, the revenues, for example. And I think secondly, having the right oversight from the investors and the company. So this means setting up the right board system, a functioning board system where, you're not only just giving updates, but you're really kind of working towards kind of longer term strategic initiatives, including setting up governance, right? And, I think the third one that I want to mention is that even though we may be working on the venture side or with a startup, I hear too often the excuse that, oh, they're a startup, they don't have the data, or, they can't do projections. And maybe this is a leftover from, the heyday where financing was, really easy. But I think even though you may be working with a startup, I think we can still insist on data and integrity of data, right? I think without that, as an investor, your kind of oversight is really, really quite limited. So I think to sum up, I think the first one is really setting up the right governance mechanism and to really being diligent and disciplined about it. Again, this is, I think, nobody's favorite subject. It only comes up when something goes wrong and that's too late, right? And I think third is really sticking to your standards and the integrity, even though you may be working with, smaller companies or younger companies. Of course, it has to be made right to size, but I don't think just because they're younger or smaller, we can, accept lax accounting and financial reporting standards.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Patricia. No, that's really comprehensive and fully agree. As a bank ourselves, these are issues we have to be very careful about, and we do take very, very seriously. And in a way, let me state the second question, but I think you may have actually answered that as well with your framework. But the second question here is in the context where there's a risk of regulatory capture, for example, where government officials or regulators may have direct ties to the private sector entities they are meant to oversee, what mechanisms are most effective for ensuring fair competition and preventing conflicts of interest? I actually want to throw that out to all the panelists if you have any thoughts on that. But I think, Patricia, a lot of what you said in your response already would apply here.
Sure. I'll try to take a stab at that. I mean, I think the mechanism is quite difficult. I think that the only thing that I can say is just doing a thorough due diligence on the actors involved of any project. And I think in emerging markets like ours, sometimes it's less straightforward than just simply putting in, databases and doing the initial search. So I think really understanding who's involved and understanding the greater network, I think that's probably what I would say to this.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Patricia. Let me I don't see any other, sorry, there are other questions. Maybe we have time for one more. There's a question here. In your view, what practical financing products or investment instruments are most suitable for supporting early stage and growing SMEs in developing regions, and what recommendations you have for effectively implementing these solutions on the ground? Does anyone want to touch on that? I think we heard quite a bit about that already.
I think Dominic, I think it goes up your alley. So
yeah, it does. But yeah, I think I kind of talked to this a bit. I mean, just also to round off the last question, I was just going to add that sometimes governments also come to us because they want to set up innovation funds. And of course, you can always set up the right governance frameworks, but often we would advise also our government clients to look at indirect approaches where they can set up a fund of funds to support other emerging funds and funds rather than necessarily do the direct investing themselves, because there's always inherent risks to doing direct investments and it's one step nearer. So I just wanted to mention that. And then on the products, there is no easy solution, but I would emphasize the process. I think it's really important first to understand what is the segment of the startup or SME ecosystem that you're trying to target, and then really map it out and understanding who are the existing investors, how many deals were closed in the last 5 years, what types of products, why are these companies not getting filled? Because it's not about supply driven. You have to understand, is there demand there, and what's the bottleneck? And then you tailor the product for that segment. And that product could be done in partnership with an FI or with a fund as well. So, I don't think there's one size fits all. You have to really understand your segment you're targeting and tailor it. And I guess that goes to Sunita's point as well about co-creating, products together. I mean, that's where you start, right? It's understanding, are we aligned in understanding the type of profile of underserviced businesses, and then really working together on co-creating a solution. There's no one solution, one size fits all for everyone. The example we gave was just one example that we think is working in those markets. It doesn't mean it's going to work in other markets. Thanks.
Okay. So thank you very much, Dominic. I actually apologize. I believe that is all the time we have for the panel. But I do want to thank all the panelists again. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. And I really hope that was useful for our audience. And from seeing some of the questions, I see it's already stimulated some very good questions and good thinking. So thank you again. Maybe I'll turn it back to Maria.
Thank you.
Thank you. I agree, Pritish. I think it was a very candid and constructive discussion. I just wanted to add perhaps one point. This is just the beginning. It's the first webinar we organize on this topic, and would like to be this, just the first of many more, and where we can either look at dedicated sessions on a particular topic, or we can open up for broader discussions. So I think for the participants who raise questions, and thank you for that, we'll try to address them and share the presentations and the audio, and also feel free to send us some topics you would like to see to have us discuss in the follow-on sessions. We don't have yet a date, but we intend to structure more similar discussions. So that would be my last point. But thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for ACGF for organizing. Thank you for the panelists and Pratish for moderating the session. We still have, I think, 1 or 2 more minutes if there's a one last remark.
I would like to just mention one more thing, if I may. I think just one of the things that I noticed is that actually a lot of the financial products in terms of structures are already existing, right, in the market. I think when people ask about what are the most appropriate products, we don't necessarily need to create new ones. I think somebody mentioned in the panel that, I think it was Dominic, who said that the homework is really in adapting and tailoring them. I think whether it's to, you know, smaller companies, venture companies, or infrastructure. So I feel like we have actually the tools, and I think this is where collaboration really comes into play. You know, how do we put it all together and tailor the existing solutions into something that is really fit for the market and fit for the product.
Fully agree, Patricia. And I think your comment may trigger a few more. As I suspect, Sunita, please go ahead.
No, just quickly, I would say that, you know, private sector is not a natural ally for philanthropies. They have worked with the nonprofit sector, so they're also on a learning kind of journey. So I would say that please keep engaging with them. Please kind of start sharing more of your work, because they're very interesting partners, but they are also learning, and they have their own skepticism about working with the private sector. So I think I would love to see more productive engagement between the ADB and the philanthropies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think as a wrap up, I just would like to wish everyone good afternoon, good morning from wherever you're joining. And we hope to see you soon in the follow-on discussions. Thank you so much.